begin with a gripping hook. The gavel slammed and the room dissolved into a chorus of laughter. I could feel in my bones. Ridiculous, the dean said, flat as a butcher's blade. A ruinous fantasy about soil and charcoal. The word crawled across the air and landed on my shoulders. Ridiculous. A quixotic farmer, they whispered in the hall, as if my dream were a stain you scrubbed out of the cotton of a family photo. Across the glare of the balcony, I saw my sister's smile bend into something pitying, my mother's eyes cloud with fear for the future she'd projected for me, and my father's jaw clench like he'd bitten a rock. Embarrassment isn't a feeling you outgrow. It's a ring you carry. I carried it, and then I dropped it, hard. In that moment, I learned a brutal truth. You don't defend a future with excuses. You earn it with proof. The words that followed, dismissal, failure, waste, weren't just professional blows. They were a verdict on me as a person. And still, in that fire, I learned the first rule of the ledger. Karma doesn't reward wants. It rewards the stubbornly faithful to a better world. The painful departure and relentless pursuit. I walked away with the taste of coffee gone cold and a heart that wouldn't blink. I left not with a plan to prove them wrong, but with a vow to prove something truer, that the earth itself could be a partner, not a punching bag. The word ridiculous followed me into the wind as I stepped from campus into the field-degraded lands that had forgotten how to keep rain or roots. I was mocked as a naive dreamer, a quixotic farmer who wore his ambition like a badge of social suicide. But the soil didn't care about social standings. It cared about breath, about the carbon tucked inside its dark seams. I pivoted from theory to practice, from the lecture hall to the logger's stumps, from the university's cold praise to the community's stubborn crapshoot of hope. I learned to read the land the way some people read a map and a prayer. I experimented with biochar, turning agricultural waste into the charcoal that would lock away carbon, feed microbes, hold moisture, and give the soil back its memory. The ridicule didn't vanish. It shifted its aim from the syllabus to the field, from the chair to the fence line, from the board to the markets. The early days were a brutal sermon. Failure was loud. Success was almost a rumor. I grafted compost with biochar, coaxed my first improvised demonstration plants to release their tiny miracles. The way a single worm can tell you whether a bed is alive. The way a seedling learns to stand after a drought with the touch of a careful hand. I faced budget cuts, skeptical funders, and nights where the only company was a chorus of frogs and the sting of cold air on bare soil. But I kept at it. The work was a plant that needed pruning with patience. I traveled to villages where the people's tables were empty and the earth wore a dull gray like a tired coat. I showed them how to build small pyrolyzers from old drums, how to turn waste into life, how to map water cycles, how to talk to farmers who'd forgotten how to listen to the land. The ridicule morphed into stubborn curiosity, and curiosity grew into a stubborn hope. The initial triumphs were modest. A field here, a community garden there, a schoolyard with a sandbox of seedlings that seemed to breathe better when fed with charcoal-rich soil. But the pattern was clear. Regenerative agriculture isn't a sprint. It's a patient revolution. And revolutions don't care about the speed of a single sprint. The arduous ascension and profound triumph. Years passed in a slow, glorious burn. I learned to multiply the life in a hectare as if I could multiply trust in a person. The degraded lands began to wake, the soil loosened, color returning as if the earth remembered its own vocabulary. Biochar became a conductor for microbes, and each plot turned into a small ecosystem. Soil carbon climbing, water holding capacity increasing, plant resilience strengthening. My team learned to read the soil's heartbeat. If the pH shifted, If earthworms rose to the surface after a storm, if a rain event yielded more seeds than the previous year, we were listening. And the markets listened back. We crafted partnerships with farmers who'd once watched their fields fail in droughts, with schools that needed teaching materials about sustainability, with governments hungry for the narrative of a land regained. The breakthrough came when a cluster of barren hills, so steep they haunted the memory of the valley, transformed, not a miracle, but a method. We put in a network of biochar beneficiary plots, demonstration farms, training centers, and micro-processing facilities for the biochar itself. We measured soil organic matter rising year over year, crops returning with vigor, biodiversity returning to the margins of hedgerows like a chorus returning to a stage. The science became a story that could travel, and the story traveled. Media outlets, international conferences, donor agencies. I wasn't just proving that regenerative agriculture could work. I was showing that a community could reweave its own weather, its own future. And then came the moment that felt like a reckoning and a release all at once. A regional ceremony saluting the regreened landscapes. I stood on a stage built on a hillside once barren, now a living map of green veins. People who had thrown the word ridiculous at me years ago stood in the crowd, some with hands in pockets, some with eyes that finally looked at me without wariness of what I represented. The soil under our feet didn't whisper. It roared in a way you could hear with your bones. I held a handful of soil that used to be nothing but dust and said, "This isn't about me." The crowd absorbed the truth. The earth had become our fiercest ally because we stopped fighting it. The research scholars who once dismissed me now asked for data. The farmers who teased me learned the rhythm of patience and reciprocity. The funders learned to tell a different story about return on investment, one that included resilience, jobs, and a future that could be tasted in the harvest. My name spread, not as a boast, but as a beacon. Regenerative agronomy isn't a fringe dream. It's a practical revolution that feeds bodies and repairs the living world. The Field of Triumph wasn't a single plot. It was a mosaic of fields, hedgerows, and rivers. The proof wasn't loud. It was abundant. The soil's hum, the crop's vigor, the community's revived heartbeat. The cathartic return and poetic justice. When I finally came home, I did not walk through the door as the marked, ridiculous figure I'd once been. I came with a convoy of stories, a map of brown soil turned black with life, and the quiet, unassuming strength of someone who had learned to forgive and to demand better from the earth and from herself. The house was a narrow corridor of memories, the same walls that had echoed with laughter and judgment. I invited them to walk with me through a field behind the old barn, where a riverbank had slept under sedge and silence until we woke it with charcoal and compost. The family stood at the fence, a line they'd once drawn to keep me out of their judgment. Now I asked them to look not at the past, but at the present. Rows of lettuce, thick as a living quilt, fruit trees bending with fruit, a hillside that glowed with the green sheen of thriving life. My father broke the line he had kept taut for years and stepped forward, not to condemn, but to witness. My mother's eyes, that once swam with doubt, finally settled on a horizon where there was something beyond failure. My sister, who had believed the world would have mercy on me if I abandoned the dream, found herself listening to the old soil talk through the wind. And then there was the moment, unforgettable and quiet, when my mother, voice small but resolute, whispered, "If this is what you were chasing, I'm sorry I doubted you." It wasn't theatrics, it was gravity shifting. The room around us didn't forgive in a single breath, but it did forgive in a way that changes futures. The laughter that once followed me like a chain dissolved into a murmuring gratitude from children who now tasted vegetables grown on the same land where I had once been dismissed. The city's applause found me later, yes, but this moment, the family's reconciliation with the truth of the land, felt larger, heavier, more real. Karma wasn't a punchline here, it was the soil. Hard, forgiving, and endlessly patient. I told them what I'd learned. That the earth doesn't demean you for dreaming. It demands you to work with it, to listen to its warnings and its songs, to keep your promises to the soil as stubbornly as you kept your promises to yourself. The path from ridicule to recognition was not a line, but a living circle. The seasons turning, the soil turning, the hearts turning toward what is truly possible when we stop telling ourselves we can't. And in that turning, I'd become not the joke of a family, but the proof of a future where sustainable agriculture is not a miracle, but a method, not an exception, but a standard. If you asked me what this feels like, I'd say it feels like mercy earned with calloused hands, like a ledger finally balanced after decades of debt. I am not finished, but I am fulfilled. The earth, our fiercest ally, has rewarded the stubborn, the faithful. The ones who refused to abandon the ridiculous dream when every voice insisted it be buried. And in the quiet after the storm, I understand the ultimate harvest, the courage to begin again, the humility to listen, and the shared joy of a family that learned to wager on a future that truly feeds us all.